Think about those incredibly skilled people who operate in the shadows, right? In the world of intelligence.
Hmm.
You might assume their abilities are like totally different from what you need every day.
Yeah, it seems like a whole other world.
But what if the core skills that make someone successful in espionage, the kind of things the CIA and similar groups rely on constantly, could actually give you a significant advantage in your own life, no matter what you're tackling?
That's the really compelling connection we're exploring today. We've looked at a whole range of open source
Oh,
materials.
okay.
So publicly available information about intelligence agencies, insights from former operatives, some fascinating cognitive research,
Yeah.
basically trying to bring you some truly valuable perspectives.
Exactly. We're looking at how to take those fundamental intelligence skills like, razor sharp critical thinking, a heightened awareness of your surroundings, understanding human behavior, effective leadership, even smart risk
All
management,
those core competencies.
and integrate them into your daily routines.
Yeah. And I think it's really crucial to emphasize right from the start that we're focusing purely on the practical and positive applications.
Yes,
Our
absolutely.
aim here is self-improvement, better decision-making, increased effectiveness, definitely not anything outside, legal and ethical boundaries.
Absolutely. The underlying idea is just that the intense demands of intelligence work have, well, cultivated these highly refined skills in areas that can benefit basically everyone.
It's a high pressure cooker for developing these abilities.
Exactly. So get ready, because we're about to break down how developing an intelligence mindset can offer some, well, pretty surprising benefits in navigating your own world.
So let's begin with that fundamental mindset, because in these high-stakes situations, a specific set of guiding principles really shapes how individuals act and make choices.
Okay, let's unpack this. One key aspect has got to be adaptability and flexibility, right? I mean, think about it. If you're an intelligence operative, you're often thrown into completely unpredictable scenarios.
Totally unpredictable. Objectives can change instantly. The environment is constantly shifting.
Right.
And what's fascinating here is the premium placed on this ability. You look at former CIA officers like Doug Billard and Melissa Hotchner. They actually looked for a willingness to learn anything in potential recruits.
Really? Why specifically that?
Well, their reasoning was that an agent could be assigned to pretty much any region or subject matter on short notice. And, specialized skills officers also need to be prepared for incredibly diverse and changing conditions. It's just part of the job.
And it's not just the operatives themselves, is it? I read that even children in CIA families tend to develop a knack for adapting to frequent changes. It becomes kind of ingrained.
Yeah, it becomes part of their family life, moving around, new schools. So the question is, how can we cultivate that in our own lives?
Right, because most of us aren't facing quite that level of upheaval.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, developing adaptability isn't just about being, laid back. It's really an active skill. The sources suggest deliberately stepping outside your comfort zone.
Okay, like how?
It could be as simple as trying a new type of food, maybe starting a new hobby, or even beginning to learn a foreign language,
Hmm.
which is something consistently emphasized in CIA training, by the way.
They really see language skills as foundational, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Foundational. Another practical approach is mental reframing.
Okay.
So instead of viewing unexpected changes as, purely negative setbacks, you try to see them as opportunities for learning or maybe a new direction
Right, find the upside.
and something we could probably all benefit from.
Yeah.
What if scenario planning?
Hmm.
Just mentally walking through potential challenges and how you might respond. It's about building that mental agility, that flexibility.
It's almost like preparing your brain for the unexpected detours life throws at you. It kind of reminds me of that saying, maybe from Laozi, about the strength in being like water, able to adapt to any container.
Exactly. Embracing transitions rather than fighting them. Now, a closely linked ability, and just as crucial, is resilience. That capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and, importantly, manage pressure effectively.
Because whether you're on some sensitive operation or just facing a crucial deadline at work, pressure is, well, it's always part of the equation, isn't it?
Absolutely. In intelligence, you have specialized skills officers making critical decisions under really tight time constraints. The sources mention things like stress inoculation training.
Stress inoculation, what's that?
It's essentially controlled exposure to stressors to build up your tolerance, your resilience. There's also the interplay between our emotional, right brain response and our logical left brain response under pressure. The goal is to keep that analytical part functioning clearly.
And the secrecy involved in intelligence work, I mean, that must create some unique pressures on personal relationships, too.
Oh, undoubtedly. Maintaining that level of discretion, navigating those complexities, it adds another whole layer. And thinking about leadership in a crisis, the idea of projecting calm, they call it the win and Oscar principle, is particularly insightful.
Win an Oscar.
Yeah, it's about stabilizing your team, projecting confidence, even if you're feeling the pressure internally. And the Cooper color codes, which we'll definitely get into more detail on later, they also implicitly relate to managing your mental state when things get intense.
Okay, so what are some ways we can build that kind of resilience in our daily lives? Because that sounds incredibly useful.
Yeah, this raises a really important point, and the sources offer some valuable starting places. Things like mindfulness, emotional regulation techniques can help manage that immediate stress response.
Right, sort of calming the system.
Exactly, and learning to differentiate between your subjective emotional reaction and the objective facts of a situation, that's also key to avoiding overwhelm.
Stepping back a bit.
Yeah. Focus your energy on the aspects you can actually control, right? And remember that strong relationships provide crucial support. Finally, try to reframe adversity. Don't see it as just a purely negative experience, but maybe as a chance for growth. Mark Polymeropoulos called it the performance-enhancing drug of success.
Huh. I like that idea, turning obstacles into, well, fuel for growth.
And just as a strong sense of mission provides resilience for intelligence operatives, connecting with your own core values and purpose can be a really powerful anchor during challenging times. It kind of echoes that wisdom maybe from Laozi again about finding strength in your principles.
Okay, so we're adaptable, we're resilient. What's the next piece of this whole intelligence mindset puzzle?
Preparation and taking a proactive stance. These are absolutely vital. The concept of operating left of bang is really central here.
Like Def Bang, you mentioned that before. Explain that again.
Think of it like noticing dark clouds forming before it starts pouring rain. It means acting before a crisis hits, rather than just reacting to events as they unfold, getting ahead of the problem.
So it's about anticipation, not just reaction.
Exactly. Consider something like advanced situational awareness training. It's all about recognizing those subtle cues, those anomalies, that might indicate something is about to happen. Risk assessment, really in any field, is inherently proactive, isn't
It's
it?
true, yeah.
You're identifying potential issues and vulnerabilities before they cause problems. Even using structured analytic techniques, which we'll talk more about early in the intelligence process, is about getting ahead in your analysis, anticipating possibilities.
Okay, so how does this translate to our daily lives? Most of us aren't exactly anticipating international incidents, you know?
No, but the principle is exactly the same. It just highlights the importance of planning, doing your research, thinking ahead, those what-if scenarios for important decisions.
Right.
Financial planning, career development, even just organizing a family trip. All of these are examples of being proactive, of operating left of bang in your own context. It's a fundamental shift from passively waiting for things to happen to
Yeah.
actively anticipating and preparing.
That makes perfect sense. It's about taking control where you actually have the ability to do so. Now, another aspect that really stood out in the sources is the emphasis on objectivity. It's not just about seeing things clearly, but actively working against your own biases.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is huge. Andrew Bustamante specifically mentions CIA training that emphasizes questioning those initial gut feelings, those first impressions.
Distrusting your own perception almost?
In a way, yes. And always seeking to confirm your understanding with multiple independent sources of information. Validate, validate, validate.
Because we all have our biases, don't we? It doesn't matter how smart we think we are.
Absolutely. The sources even point out research showing that a high IQ doesn't automatically protect you from cognitive biases. Not at all.
So intelligence isn't immunity.
Nope. That's where critical thinking becomes so essential. It demands evidence-based reasoning and a conscious, active effort to recognize and address those biases. Techniques like analysis of competing hypotheses, which we'll definitely dig into later, are specifically designed to counteract things like confirmation bias, just looking for stuff that confirms what you already believe.
Right.
And it's not just at the individual analyst level. Intelligence leadership stresses the importance of providing objective analysis to decision makers, even if that analysis doesn't align with what they might want to hear.
That takes courage sometimes, I bet. So how can we cultivate more of that objectivity in our own lives? It sounds hard.
It requires a really active and disciplined approach. It's not passive. It starts with questioning your own assumptions and those immediate gut reactions. Make a conscious effort to seek out diverse perspectives, especially viewpoints that actually challenge your own.
Lean into the disagreement.
Kind of, yeah. Develop a habit of verifying information from multiple reliable sources. Actively work on distinguishing between objective facts and subjective opinions or interpretations. And a key practice, really central to techniques like ACH, is to deliberately look for evidence that contradicts your preferred explanation or hypothesis.
Actively try to prove yourself
In
wrong.
a structured way, yes.
Hmm.
It's an ongoing commitment to careful methods and, importantly, self-correction. It takes effort.
It sounds like it takes real mental effort, yeah.
Mm.
Now, the world is constantly changing, right? New information is always emerging. That leads us to the idea of continuous learning and curiosity, which seems pretty vital in intelligence.
Oh, absolutely vital. Dillard and Hotchner, again, remember they emphasized the willingness to learn anything.
Right, because you never know what you'll need to know.
Exactly. In such a dynamic global environment, lifelong learning isn't just a nice to have, it's a flat-out necessity.
Hmm.
And intelligence training reflects this specialized courses language training, which they see as truly foundational.
You mentioned that.
And encouraging the open exchange of ideas. And even think about a cyber threat analyst. They need incredibly deep technical skills, sure,
Yeah.
but also the ability to clearly communicate really complex information to non-experts.
So it's not just about absorbing facts, it's about being able to connect them, synthesize them, and explain them effectively.
Precisely. Critical thinking itself is often described as being informed by evidence, which naturally requires ongoing knowledge acquisition. And recommendations for aspiring intelligence officers often include things like reading widely and continuously honing research and writing skills.
So what are some simple ways we can encourage that continuous learning habit in our own lives?
Well, the sources offer some pretty straightforward ideas. Read broadly, explore topics outside your usual comfort zone or interests.
Get diverse inputs.
Exactly. Actively seek feedback on your understanding and performance. Don't hesitate to ask clarifying questions. It actually demonstrates intellectual humility, not ignorance. Develop genuine expertise in your areas of interest, whatever they are, and always, always maintain an open mind to the possibility that there's more to learn.
It's about staying intellectually agile and curious, isn't it? Now, this next one sounds a bit intense. Embracing discomfort. Getting off the X. What exactly is the X?
Okay, so Michelle Rigby-Assad, she's a former intelligence officer, uses the X initially as a tactical metaphor. Imagine it's a dangerous location, like a kill zone in a firefight.
Okay, not good.
Definitely not good. The immediate critical goal is to get out of it, to move as quickly as possible.
Right, makes sense.
But then she applies this concept much more broadly to everyday life. Here, the X represents any uncomfortable situation where you feel trapped or stuck.
Stuck.
Yeah.
Like how?
Maybe it's a dissatisfying job you hate going to, or a challenging relationship that isn't working, or even just the inertia of avoiding a difficult but important goal because it feels overwhelming. It's that place of stagnation and discomfort.
So it's about recognizing when you're in that metaphorical danger zone, that stuck place in your own life.
Exactly. It's about diagnosing that feeling of being stuck and then finding the courage to move, to step into the unknown, despite any fear or uncertainty you might feel. Jason Hansen echoes this in survival situations with his Rule 4, movement saves lives. Movement is key.
Movement saves lives. Interesting parallel.
And effective leadership, as Mark Polymeropoulos points out, often involves pushing beyond comfort zones, both for yourself and for your team. You have to be willing to get off the X.
Okay, so we've identified our personal X. We know we're stuck. How do we actually get off it? That sounds like the hard part.
It often is. The sources suggest several approaches. One is taking calculated risks, not reckless leaps, but measured steps into the unknown.
Small steps.
Could be. Or breaking down those big, overwhelming challenges into smaller, more manageable actions, building your confidence incrementally by achieving small successes along the way.
Momentum builds momentum.
Exactly. And crucially, reframing that feeling of discomfort. Don't see it just as a signal to retreat back to safety, but potentially as a sign that you're on the edge of growth. It's about making a conscious choice to embrace the challenge, for the possibility of something better,
Instead of staying stuck.
rather than remaining in what Assad so powerfully calls that certain death of our dreams. Choosing challenge over stagnation.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Choosing growth over staying stagnant, even when it feels daunting or scary. Okay, so we've developed this foundational intelligence mindset. Now, how do we sharpen our minds with some specific techniques? Where do we go next?
Well, that leads us directly into the vital area of critical thinking and analysis. Because in intelligence, the ability to think clearly, rigorously, is just essential, especially given all the ambiguity, the incomplete information, the potential for outright deception.
Right, because the stakes are often incredibly high, and you're working with fuzzy data a lot of the time.
Precisely. Analysts are essentially tasked with making sense of this messy flood of information to anticipate threats and inform crucial, often time-sensitive decisions. And history shows that intelligence failures have often been linked back to a lack of strong critical thinking.
It's not just about having the data, but how you process it.
Exactly. And again, the sources really emphasize that while general intelligence, IQ, is helpful, it doesn't automatically lead to good judgment or rational decision making. Those are distinct skills.
Being smart isn't the same as thinking critically.
Correct. And that's why structured analytic techniques, or SATs, were developed to deliberately bring more rigor to the process and, importantly, help minimize the impact of those cognitive biases we all have.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about thinking strategically and systematically. And that careful thinking isn't just for spies. It's pretty vital for making sound judgments in all aspects of life, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's universally applicable. Now, to really understand the fundamental building blocks of critical thinking, the work of Dr. Peter Fassini is very insightful. He identified 6 core cognitive skills that are applicable across many fields, including intelligence analysis. They call it the CTIP, sometimes critical thinking applied to intelligence analysis process.
Okay, 6 core skills. What are they? Let's break them down.
Right. They are interpretation, analysis, inference, evaluation, explanation, and self-regulation. Think of them as the essential tools in your mental toolkit for really dissecting problems and forming well-reasoned judgments.
Okay, let's try to make those concrete. Can we walk through each one with a quick, practical, everyday example?
Definitely. Let's start with interpretation. That's basically about grasping the meaning of information accurately. So imagine you're in a team meeting. Interpretation is about truly understanding everyone else's perspectives and the data presented before you jump in with your own opinions or solutions.
Okay, understanding first. Makes sense. What about analysis?
Analysis involves identifying the underlying assumptions, what's being taken for granted, and figuring out the relationships or connections between different pieces of information. So, for example, if you're comparing different job offers, you're analyzing the salary, the benefits, the commute time, the opportunities for growth, how they all relate to each other and to your priorities.
Right, weighing the different factors and how they connect. Okay, I follow that. What about inference? That sounds a bit more like drawing conclusions.
It is. Inference is about drawing logical conclusions based on the available evidence, even if it's incomplete. Let's say a project you're involved in is consistently missing deadlines, and you're hearing only vague feedback from the team members. You might infer that the project is actually falling significantly behind schedule, even if no one has explicitly come out and stated it yet.
Reading between the lines based on the evidence. Got it. And evaluation. That sounds like judging things.
It is, but in a critical sense. Evaluation is about assessing the credibility of sources and the strength of arguments or claims. So when you read a news article, you should be evaluating the source. Is it reliable? Does it have a known bias? You consider if the claims being made are actually supported by solid evidence.
Right, being a discerning consumer of information, not just passively accepting it. And explanation. Is that just explaining yourself?
It's more than that. Explanation is about clearly articulating your reasoning process and justifying your conclusions with supporting evidence. If you're explaining a significant financial decision to, say, your partner or a financial advisor, you would need to clearly outline the factors you considered, the evidence you looked at, and the logical steps that led you to that specific choice.
Laying out your thinking clearly. Okay. And the last one, self-regulation.
This one is crucial. Self-regulation is about consciously monitoring your own thinking process. It's about identifying potential biases or flawed reasoning in yourself and then correcting your course. For example, after maybe a tense argument or disagreement, you might reflect afterwards and ask yourself, did my own stress or emotions overly influence my reactions? How could I approach a similar situation more objectively next time?
So it's like being your own quality control check for your thinking.
Exactly. So you see, these aren't just like abstract academic concepts. They're actually concrete mental actions you can practice to think more clearly and objectively every day.
That's really helpful. Now, building on those foundational skills, you mentioned structured analytic techniques or SATs earlier. You said they're more specific methods.
Yes, SATs are designed to help you make your thinking process more explicit, more externalized, and specifically to challenge your underlying assumptions and biases.
I remember you said they were developed for complex intelligence problems, but they could be adapted for everyday stuff too.
Absolutely. While they are definitely used for tackling really complex, ambiguous intelligence issues, the core principles are surprisingly adaptable. They encourage you to break down problems systematically, get your thoughts out where you can see them, like on paper or a whiteboard. They can foster creativity by forcing you to consider alternatives, help you manage uncertainty, and even facilitate collaboration if you do them with others. Let's look at a couple of practical examples. The key assumptions check is a really useful one, and relatively simple.
Okay, key assumptions check. How does that work? Walk me through it.
Okay, first, you clearly state the conclusion you're leaning towards or the decision you're currently considering making.
Got it. State the goal.
Then, you brainstorm and list all the underlying beliefs or conditions that absolutely must be true for that conclusion or decision to actually be valid or successful. You have to ask yourself, what am I taking for granted here?
Uncover the hidden foundations.
Exactly. Once you have that list of assumptions, you critically examine each one. Ask questions like, why do I believe this is true? How confident am I really in this belief? What specific evidence supports it? What evidence might contradict it? Under what circumstances might this assumption turn out to be false?
Really stress testing each assumption.
Precisely. Finally, based on this critical examination, you refine your original conclusion or plan. Maybe you stick with it, but now you're more confident. Or maybe you modify it. Or maybe you develop backup plans specifically for those assumptions that seem a bit shaky or uncertain after you've challenged them.
Wow, okay. That sounds incredibly helpful for making big life decisions, right? Like thinking about a career change or buying a house or making a major investment.
Exactly. It's perfect for those. But it can also be valuable for things like planning complex projects, evaluating business strategies, or even just trying to understand disagreements with other people by surfacing those hidden, potentially mismatched assumptions.
That's really practical. Okay, what's another one? You mentioned analysis of competing hypotheses, or ACH. That one sounded a bit more involved.
It does have a few more steps, yes, but the core idea is actually quite elegant. It's designed to help you evaluate several different possible explanations for an unclear or ambiguous situation by actively looking for evidence that disproves each explanation, rather than just confirming your favorite one.
Okay, disproving, not proving. Interesting. How does it work?
First, you clearly define the specific question you're trying to answer or the problem you're trying to solve. Then, you generate a range of plausible hypotheses or explanations. Ideally, these should be mutually exclusive, if possible, and cover all the likely possibilities. Think broadly here.
Brainstorm all the possibilities.
Right. Next, you gather all the relevant evidence, facts, or pieces of information you can find related to the situation. The crucial step comes next. You create a matrix, like a simple table. List your hypotheses across the top and list the pieces of evidence down the side.
Okay, got the grid.
Now, for each piece of evidence, you go across the row and assess how it relates to each hypothesis. Does this piece of evidence strongly support a hypothesis? Mark it with a plus. Mark it with a plus. Does it strongly contradict or undermine a hypothesis? Mark it with a minus. If it has no real significant bearing either way, maybe mark it NA or leave it blank.
So you're systematically comparing every piece of evidence against every possible explanation.
Exactly. And here's the key shift in thinking. You focus primarily on the contradictions, the minuses. Which hypotheses are most strongly undermined or contradicted by the actual evidence? You then tentatively identify the hypothesis that has the fewest inconsistencies, the fewest minuses. The whole goal is to actively try to disprove your hypotheses, to find the flaws in them, rather than falling into the trap of just looking for evidence that confirms your initial hunch or preferred theory.
Wow. So it's a much more structured and disciplined way of being objective and forcing yourself to consider different possibilities seriously, even if they're not the ones you initially liked or thought were likely.
Precisely. It's incredibly useful for dealing with ambiguous situations where the answer isn't obvious, for troubleshooting complex problems where multiple things could be wrong, or for making tricky diagnostic judgments in medicine or any other field. The real benefit of adapting these SATs, whether it's the key assumptions check or ACH, isn't really about trying to become a professional intelligence analyst overnight.
Right. That's not the goal.
No. The value lies in adopting the structured thinking process itself. It forces you to pause, to slow down your thinking, move beyond those quick, intuitive gut reactions, and examine your assumptions and the available evidence in a much more systematic, rigorous, and objective way.
That makes a lot of sense, taking the time to think better. Now, even if you do the most brilliant analysis, it's pretty useless if you can't communicate it clearly and effectively, right? The sources mention something called the BLUF principle. What's that all about?
BLUF, yes. It stands for bottom line up front. It's a communication principle that's very widely used in intelligence circles and also in the military, basically anywhere where clear, concise communication is absolutely essential for rapid understanding and decision-making. Bottom line up front, okay? Sounds direct. It is. The core idea is simple. You present your main conclusion, your key finding, or your recommendation right at the very beginning of your communication, whether it's an email, a report, a presentation, even a conversation. Then you follow up with the supporting details, the context, and your reasoning.
So you don't bury the lead.
Exactly. You don't make people wade through paragraphs of background before they get to the point. Intelligence training heavily emphasizes clear writing and briefing skills for this reason, and effective analytical writing is often characterized by its precision, its use of simple, unambiguous language, and a clear, logical structure. There's a great quote from the historian David McCullough: "To write well is to think clearly." Practicing BLUF forces you to achieve that clarity before you communicate.
I like that. To write well is to think clearly. So how does using BLUF benefit us in our regular everyday lives?
Well, first off, it saves time, both yours and your audience's. It respects people's attention spans. It ensures that your most important message isn't missed or buried somewhere down in the details.
Gets the key info across quickly.
Right. And practicing BLUF actually encourages you to think more concisely. It forces you to identify your core message, your actual bottom line, before you even start writing or speaking. It directly relates back to Fashion's explanation skill we talk about, presenting your reasoning clearly and directly. So by striving for simplicity, a logical structure, and avoiding unnecessary jargon in your emails, presentations, or important conversations, you can significantly improve how well your message is received and understood.
Okay, bottom line up front, I get it. Concise and clear. Now, even with the clearest thinking and communication, we're all human, right? We inevitably make mistakes or have blind spots. The sources talk quite a bit about the importance of self-correction and actively seeking out feedback.
Absolutely. This is fundamental. Critical thinking isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process of continuous refinement and improvement. It requires constant self-monitoring. That's Fashion's self-regulation skill again. Being, as he put it, self-directed, self-monitored, self-disciplined, and self-corrective.
So, policing your own thinking.
Yes, but it's not just about your own internal reflection, which is important. Actively seeking out external perspectives is equally vital. Things like having someone else review your work, getting honest feedback, being willing to revise your conclusions based on that feedback. These are crucial for improving the overall quality of your thinking and communication. Intelligence leadership often encourages a culture of constructive self-criticism and the implementation of corrective actions when things go wrong. And Mark Polymeropoulos, again, strongly emphasized the importance of learning from failures and, crucially, accepting constructive criticism with humility, not defensiveness.
That humility part can be tough sometimes. So how do we put that into practice in our own lives? How do we get better at self-correction and using feedback?
Well, one way is to develop the habit of reflecting on your decisions and how you navigated complex situations after they've occurred. Take a few minutes to review your thought process. Ask yourself, were there any biases that might have influenced my thinking? Could I have considered other alternatives? What could I have done differently?
A sort of personal after-action review.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to actively ask for constructive criticism from trusted colleagues, mentors, or maybe friends whose judgment you really respect. Ask specific questions. How could I have approached that differently? Or what blind spots might I have? And most importantly, try to shift your mindset. View mistakes not as personal failures to be hidden or defensive about, but as valuable data points. They offer information that can help you refine your critical thinking skills and make better decisions in the future.
That's a really constructive way to look at it, learning from the data of your own experiences, both successes and failures. Okay, so we've sharpened our minds with critical thinking and analysis techniques. Now let's talk about seeing the world around us more effectively, enhancing our situational awareness. This sounds really interesting.
Yes, situational awareness, often shortened to SA, is truly the bedrock for making sound decisions in any complex or dynamic environment. At its most basic core, it's simply about knowing what is going on around you.
That sounds fairly straightforward, almost obvious, but I imagine there's probably more depth to it than just, noticing things passing by.
There definitely is. Dr. Micah Ensley developed a very influential model that breaks down SA into 3 distinct but connected levels. Level 1 is perception. This is the most basic level, simply perceiving the status, attributes, and dynamics of the relevant elements in your environment. So if you're driving, it's noticing the other cars, the pedestrians, the traffic signals, the road conditions.
Okay, just taking in the raw data through your senses, what's level 2?
Level 2 is comprehension. This involves integrating all that perceived information and understanding what it means in relation to your current goals. It's about interpreting the significance of what you're perceiving within its context. So back to the driving example. You perceive a car ahead braking suddenly, level 1, and you perceive a pedestrian stepping off the curb, level 1. Comprehension level 2 is realizing that these two things happening together constitute a potential hazard that requires your attention and possibly action.
Okay, so it's connecting the dots and understanding the immediate implications. I follow that. What's level 3 then?
Level 3 is projection. This is the highest level of SA, and it involves anticipating the future status of the elements in the environment based on your comprehension of the current situation and its dynamics. It's about looking ahead. So continuing the driving example, based on the speed and lane position of a car in the adjacent lane, and maybe noticing its turn signal is activated, you project, level 3, that it is likely to merge into your lane shortly. This allows you to proactively adjust your own speed or lane position to maintain safety.
So it's not just seeing what is happening, but predicting what's likely to happen next based on that understanding.
Exactly. And SA is a dynamic, continuous process. It's constantly updating. It's also goal-directed. What you pay attention to depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And it's influenced by factors like where you're focusing your attention, your working memory capacity, and crucially, your prior experiences and training. And the bottom line is, strong SA across all three levels is a fundamental prerequisite for effective and timely decision-making.
Yeah.
You can't make good decisions if you don't accurately perceive, comprehend, and anticipate what's going on around you.
That makes total sense. You need good input for good output. So it's not just about what you see, but about understanding what it means and what might happen next. How do we get better at that basic level 1, the perception part, just noticing more?
Well, it starts with consciously developing and honing your fundamental observation skills. It sounds simple, but most of us don't do it very actively. In intelligence work, particularly surveillance and counter-surveillance, meticulous observation is absolutely essential. The sources mention operatives using techniques like subtly observing reflections in windows or mirrors to discreetly monitor their surroundings without looking directly.
Like in the movies.
Sort of, yeah. Or making sudden, seemingly unmotivated changes in direction while walking to see if anyone behind them mirrors the change, potentially indicating they are being followed. Even advanced situational awareness training programs specifically focus on enhancing these basic observation skills and memory recall for details. A really key element they teach is establishing a baseline of what is normal in a particular environment, what does it usually look like, sound like, feel like, and then actively looking for anomalies, for anything that deviates from that established baseline. Hansen talks about this a lot regarding personal safety.
Spotting the thing that's out of place because you know what in place looks like. So it's about being more present and actively observing, rather than just passively letting your surroundings wash over you. Are there any specific exercises or things we can practice to get better at this?
Absolutely. There's several simple things you can do. Practicing variations of Kim's game, where you look at a collection of objects for a short time and then try to recall as many details as possible from memory, can significantly sharpen your visual memory and attention to detail.
I remember that from childhood.
Yeah. Or when you enter a new environment, a coffee shop, a meeting room, a store, make a conscious effort to actively scan the area. Don't just find your seat. Notice the layout, the exits, who's there, what they're doing. Pay more deliberate attention to nonverbal cues during conversations, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and afterwards maybe take 30 seconds to mentally or even physically by writing it down. Describe the scene or the interaction in as much detail as you can remember. These kinds of exercises help shift you from being a passive observer to a much more active, engaged one.
That makes sense. Turning observation into an active skill, not just a passive sense. Now, you mentioned earlier we can't be on super high alert all the time, right? That would be exhausting. The sources mentioned the Cooper color codes as a way to manage our level of alertness. Can you explain those? They sound intriguing.
Yeah, the Cooper color codes, developed by the late L.T. Jeff Cooper, offer a really simple but surprisingly effective mental framework for calibrating or adjusting your level of awareness based on the perceived level of threat or uncertainty in your environment. It helps you manage your mental resources.
Okay, so what are the colors?
It starts with condition white. This represents a state of complete unawareness and unpreparedness. You're totally relaxed, maybe zoned out, not paying any attention to your surroundings. Cooper argued this state is only truly safe in genuinely secure and familiar environments, like maybe you're locked home when you know you're alone. You're vulnerable in white.
Okay, way to switched off. What's next?
Next up is condition yellow. This is described as a state of relaxed alertness. You are aware of your surroundings, you're generally scanning for potential threats or anomalies, but you're not focused on any specific one. You're simply present and observant. This is the recommended baseline state to maintain whenever you're out in public. The key is that it's sustainable over long periods without causing excessive mental fatigue or stress.
Okay, so yellow is the goal for general public awareness, aware but relaxed. What about the other colors, when things get more specific?
Right. If something specific captures your attention, something that seems out of place, potentially suspicious, or warrants closer observation, you move into condition orange. This signifies a state of specific alert. You have identified a potential threat or something that needs closer scrutiny, and you are now focusing your mental attention on it. You're evaluating the situation more intensely, considering your potential responses, and maybe setting mental triggers for action. If that person does X, I will do Y. This is a state of heightened vigilance, and it's definitely more mentally taxing than condition yellow.
Okay, orange is focused alert on a specific potential issue. What comes after orange?
Condition red is the action state. Your predetermined mental trigger, set in orange, has been activated. You perceive an imminent threat that requires an immediate response, and you are now executing your planned response, whether that's fighting, fleeing, de-escalating, whatever the appropriate action is. This is obviously a very demanding state, both mentally and physically, and is generally only sustainable for very short periods during the actual crisis.
Red is go time, taking action. Is there anything beyond red?
Unfortunately, yes. There's condition black. This represents a state of cognitive overload, intense panic, or even paralysis, the classic freeze response. Cooper suggested this often results from being caught completely by surprise, essentially going directly from the unprepared state of condition white into a high-threat situation without the intermediate stages of yellow and orange. The brain just shuts down. The goal is always to avoid condition black by being prepared.
Wow, okay. So the practical application is try to operate generally in condition yellow when you're out and about. This allows you to spot potential issues early. If something specific warrants attention, you shift consciously to condition orange to assess it and prepare. And you only move to condition red if you absolutely need to take action. And by doing this, you hopefully avoid being surprised and ending up in condition black.
Exactly. That's the core idea. Maintain an appropriate level of awareness, yellow, so you can detect potential problems early, giving yourself that crucial time and mental space to assess the situation, orange, and respond effectively if necessary, red. This minimizes the element of surprise and dramatically reduces the risk of freezing up or panicking, black. It's also worth noting that transitions between these states don't always happen sequentially in order. You might perceive a sudden, clear, and immediate threat while in yellow and jump directly to red.
Right, no time for orange sometimes.
Correct. But the framework itself really helps to operationalize Ensley's SA model for practical personal safety. Think of it this way. Condition yellow helps with perception and basic comprehension. Condition orange involved heightened comprehension and initial projection. What might happen? What should I do? Condition red is acting decisively based on that projection. Condition white represents a failure of perception, and condition black often represents a failure to act effectively due to a catastrophic lack of prior SA and preparation.
That's a really clear and practical framework for thinking about managing awareness and responding to potential threats in everyday life. Now, beyond just reacting to what's happening right now, that concept of left of bang came up again when we were talking about mindset, but you mentioned it in the context of being proactively aware too. How does that fit into SA?
Yeah, left of bang in the context of SA means consciously shifting from a purely reactive stance, just dealing with things as they happen, to actively seeking out pre-event indicators, those subtle signs or patterns that might suggest future events or potential problems before they actually occur.
Trying to see around the corner a bit.
Exactly. It's about recognizing patterns of behavior, both normal and abnormal, and noticing anomalies that could signal that something is about to happen, something is amiss. This, again, requires developing an understanding of what constitutes normal or baseline behavior in a given situation or environment, and then actively looking for anything that deviates significantly from that norm. A very simple example would be consciously scanning a parking lot for suspicious individuals loitering near cars or looking out of place before you even get out of your own car. This proactive awareness also ties directly into risk assessment, thinking about potential threats and vulnerabilities before they materialize into actual incidents.
So it's about developing that sense of what's typical for a place or situation and then actively training yourself to look for anything that just breaks that typical pattern, anything that feels off. How can we apply that more broadly in our daily lives?
Well, start by consciously developing an awareness of what feels normal in the environments you frequent most often, your workplace, your neighborhood, your gym, even your regular commute route. What are the usual sights, sounds, patterns of activity? Then, make it a habit to actively scan for things that seem unusual, out of place, or just don't fit the established pattern. This can certainly apply to your physical safety, like noticing someone trying to conceal themselves or paying undue attention to security measures. But the principle can also apply to other areas of your life, like noticing early warning signs of potential problems in a work project, like missed mini deadlines or team members seeming withdrawn, or recognizing subtle but consistent changes in someone's behavior in a personal relationship that might indicate an underlying issue. It's really about making that conscious shift from simply reacting to events as they hit you to actively anticipating possibilities based on observing pre-incident indicators.
Okay, that makes sense. Being more attuned to the subtle signals. Now, this last part of situational awareness you mentioned, basic counter surveillance for personal safety. That definitely sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. Is that really applicable to normal people?
Well, it's important to be clear here. Formal counter-surveillance, the kind done by intelligence agencies, is a highly specialized, complex, and often legally restricted field. That's not what we're talking about for everyday application.
Okay, good clarification.
However, some of the fundamental principles behind it can be adapted ethically and legally by anyone to simply increase their personal safety and awareness regarding unwanted attention or observation. It's primarily about two things. First, avoiding becoming an easy target, what security professionals sometimes call a soft target. And second, being more aware if you are potentially being followed or singled out for unwanted attention.
So less about complex evasion tactics, more about basic awareness and making yourself less appealing as a target.
Exactly. Think about adapting some very basic techniques, not for any illicit purpose, obviously, but simply to increase your general awareness of your surroundings. This could involve occasionally and deliberately varying your daily routines, taking a different route to work, going to the gym at a slightly different time. It makes you less predictable. Be more aware of who is behind you by making casual, non-obvious use of reflections in shop windows, car mirrors, or even your phone screen. Notice if you happen to see the same unfamiliar individuals or vehicles repeatedly in different locations over a period of time. Occasionally, maybe take a slightly longer or different route home from work or errands, and just observe calmly if anyone seems to be mirroring your movements without a clear reason.
So these are pretty subtle, low-key things.
Very subtle and non-confrontational. It's absolutely crucial to frame this correctly. This is purely about enhancing your overall situational awareness, Hensley's level 1 and 2, and improving your personal safety. It is not about encouraging paranoia, seeking confrontation, or engaging in any illegal activities like trying to surveil others yourself. The primary goal is simply to increase your vigilance and enable you to make more informed decisions about your personal security based on better awareness of your environment. It's about being a harder target by being more aware.
Okay, so it's more about being generally observant, slightly less predictable in your habits, and more aware of who's around you, rather than actively trying to detect and evade some specific confirmed surveillance team. That makes a lot more sense for everyday life.
Got it. Now, we've talked a lot about the internal mindset and observing the external world. Let's shift gears and delve into the fascinating realm of human dynamics, understanding and interacting with other people more effectively. This seems critical for intelligence work. Oh, absolutely critical. Whether you're talking about human intelligence, human gathering, where you're directly interacting with sources, or even analysis, where you need to understand the motivations and intentions behind actions, understanding people is paramount. And of course, it's just as vital in our everyday personal and professional lives.
So where do we start with mastering human dynamics? What's foundational?
Rapport. Building rapport and trust is absolutely fundamental for almost any effective human interaction. If people don't trust you or feel comfortable with you, they're unlikely to cooperate, share information openly, or be influenced positively.
Makes sense. How's this approached in intelligence?
Well, sources mention things like extensive role-playing exercises used in CIA training to hone interpersonal skills. Former officers like Andrew Bustamante talk about techniques like using appropriate vulnerability, sharing something minor about yourself to encourage the other person to open up, and subtle mirroring of body language or speech patterns to create a subconscious connection. Mark Polymeropoulos flat out called intelligence a people business, emphasizing the need to understand motivations. And you see similar principles in books by former FBI negotiators and profilers like Jack Schafer or Robin Dreeke. Building trust is step one. It even ties into Cialdini's core principles of influence, specifically liking. We're just more persuaded by people we like and trust.
Okay, so building that connection is key. What are some practical ways we can work on building better rapport in our daily interactions?
There are several things. Active listening is huge. Truly paying attention. Showing genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, reflecting back what you hear to ensure understanding. Finding common ground, shared interests, experiences, values helps build connection. Showing genuine interest in the other person, asking about their perspective, remembering small details they share. Using appropriate self-disclosure, as Bustamante mentioned, not oversharing, but revealing something relatable. And that subtle, natural mirroring of posture or tone can also help, if done genuinely and not creepily.
Right, authenticity matters there. Okay, so rapport is the foundation. What about communication strategies beyond just being clear, like we talked about with BLUF, more nuanced techniques?
Yes, effective communication goes way beyond just structure. The sources mentioned intelligence training focusing on skills like active listening, again critical, interviewing techniques, and even speed reading to process information faster. Bustamante offers a specific conversational technique he calls the two-in-one combination.
Two-in-one combination, what's that?
The idea is you ask two related open-ended questions to get the person talking and thinking along a certain line, and then you follow up with a declarative statement that sort of confirms or summarizes what you've gathered, potentially guiding the conversation further or subtly testing an assumption.
Interesting. Two questions, then a statement. What else?
Another former officer, Christina Carlson, talks about elicitation. This is a technique for subtly guiding a conversation to obtain specific information without asking direct, potentially confrontational or suspicion-raising questions. It relies more on making observations, asking related but indirect questions, expressing curiosity, and building on the other person's statements to gently steer them towards the topic you're interested in. Transparency and respect are key here for ethical use.
So getting information without directly asking for it, that sounds like it requires skill.
It does. And of course, the need for clarity, especially in cross-cultural communication, is paramount. Using simple language, avoiding jargon or slang, potentially using visual aids, and constantly checking for understanding are all crucial when communicating across cultural divides.
Okay, so how can we apply some of these more advanced communication strategies ethically in our daily lives?
Well, definitely master active listening practice, reflecting, paraphrasing, and asking clarifying questions. You could experiment with the two-in-one combination in various settings, meetings, networking, even personal conversations, just to practice structuring your inquiries. Understanding the difference between open-ended questions, which encourage detailed answers, and closed questions, which usually yield short answers like yes or no, helps you gather the type of information you need. Ethical elicitation can be useful in sales, negotiations, or teamwork, using those indirect questions, showing genuine curiosity, building on other statements, but always with respect and transparency. And consciously adapting your language and style for different audiences is just smart communication.
Right, tailoring the message. Now, understanding how to communicate is one thing, but understanding why people behave the way they do, their motivations, seems like another crucial piece.
Absolutely. If you don't understand what drives someone, it's hard to interact with them effectively. Andrew Bustamante introduces a framework used in intelligence for analyzing core motivations, which he calls the RICE-V framework.
RICE, what does that stand for?
RICE stands for the four primary motivators: reward, material gain, favors, etc., ideology, beliefs, values, patriotism, religion, often the strongest motivator according to him, coercion, threats, pressure, blackmail, obviously a negative and manipulative factor to be aware of, not to use, and ego. Recognition, pride, status, revenge.
Reward, ideology, coercion, ego. Okay, how is this used?
The idea is to use it as an analytical lens. By observing someone's behavior, listening carefully to what they say and how they say it, and considering their circumstances, you try to understand which of these factors seem to be the most salient driver for that particular individual in that specific context. Once you have a hypothesis about their primary motivator, you can then tailor your communication, negotiation style, or leadership approach accordingly, ethically, of course.
So if someone seems primarily driven by ideology, you might appeal to their values.
Exactly. Or if someone appears to have a prominent ego need, offering genuine recognition or framing things in terms of status might be more effective. The key is to leverage these motivators positively and distinguish this analytical understanding from manipulation. RICE is a tool for understanding, which then enables more effective and, hopefully, more ethical engagement.
That's a really interesting framework for thinking about what makes people tick. Now, if Rice helps understand why people are motivated, are there insights on how influence actually works psychologically?
Yes, absolutely. That's where the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini on the principles of persuasion comes in. His principles explain the psychological shortcuts our brains often use when making decisions, which makes us susceptible to influence.
Cialdini's principles, I've heard of those. Things like reciprocity.
Exactly. Reciprocity is one. The others are commitment and consistency, social proof or consensus, authority, liking, and scarcity. He later added a seventh, unity. These are studied and sometimes applied in intelligence contexts. Think about cyber influence operations or counterintelligence efforts. Understanding these principles is crucial, both for potentially using them ethically and, just as importantly, for recognizing and defending against manipulative uses by others.
Okay, let's quickly recap each one and maybe an ethical application example.
Sure. Reciprocity. We feel obliged to return favors. Ethically, you can offer genuine help or value first. Commitment and consistency. We like to be consistent with our past actions or statements. Ethically, you might gain small initial agreements on shared principles before tackling a bigger issue. Social proof consensus. We look to others' behavior to guide our own, especially in uncertainty. Ethically, you can highlight testimonials or wide adoption of an idea is true. Authority. We tend to defer to perceived experts. Ethically, you establish your genuine expertise and credibility. Liking. We're more easily persuaded by people we like. Ethically, focus on building that genuine rapport we talked about. Scarcity. Things seem more desirable when they're limited. Ethically, you can honestly highlight unique benefits or limited time opportunities. And unity. We're more influenced by people we perceive as sharing our identity, being one of us. Ethically, you emphasize shared goals, values, or group memberships.
That's a great overview. It seems understanding these is valuable both for influencing ethically and for resisting manipulation ourselves.
Definitely. You can see how Rice and Cialdini's principles can work together, right? Use Rice to diagnose the likely motivation, and then you might ethically use one or more of Cialdini's principles to engage that motivation effectively.
Right, understanding the why and then choosing the how appropriately.
Yeah.
Now, in today's world, interacting effectively often means dealing with people from different backgrounds. What about cross-cultural communication?
Hugely important and becoming more so all the time. The CIA places a massive emphasis on language proficiency and deep cultural understanding for its officers operating globally. It's essential. The concept of cultural intelligence, or CQ, is relevant here.
Cultural intelligence, CQ. What is that exactly?
It's basically the capability to function effectively in diverse cultural contexts across different national, ethnic, organizational, or other cultural groups. It involves things like your motivation to engage with different cultures, your metacognitive ability, your awareness of cultural factors and ability to strategize, and your behavioral flexibility, adapting your actions appropriately.
So it's more than just knowing facts about another culture.
Much more. And cultural differences can create real communication challenges. Think about differences in verbal styles, direct versus indirect communication, comfort with silence, tone of voice, or nonverbal cues, gestures that mean different things, norms around eye contact, personal space, facial expressions, even fundamental values and etiquette differ regarding things like time perception, punctual versus flexible, respect for hierarchy, gift-giving customs, negotiation styles. The list goes on.
That sounds like a minefield. How can we improve our cross-cultural communication skills?
Well, consciously cultivating your CQ is key through education, exposure to different cultures, and making an effort to learn. Beyond that, general strategies include practicing active listening with extra care and empathy, being adaptable and flexible in your approach, striving for maximum clarity and simplicity in your language, paying close attention to nonverbal cues, both yours and theirs, and being willing to seek feedback to ensure you're understanding and being understood correctly.
So it's about awareness, adaptability, and checking for understanding constantly. And good CQ obviously helps build better relationships, teamwork, negotiation outcomes, and just prevents misunderstandings across cultures.
Exactly. It's a critical skill set. Now, one final area within human dynamics that often comes up in relation to intelligence is detecting deception. This is a tricky one.
Ah, the human lie detector idea. Can we really learn to do that?
Well, intelligence agencies are certainly interested in deception detection, and many former professionals write or teach about potential cues, things like inconsistencies between verbal and nonverbal behavior, deviations from a person's normal baseline behavior patterns, microexpressions, etc. Bustamante talks about contrasting deceptive appearances with objective perspective. However, and this is really important, there's a need for extreme caution and strong ethical consideration when thinking about applying deception detection concepts in daily life.
Why the strong caution?
Because decades of scientific research show that most people, including professionals whose jobs involve assessing credibility, are actually surprisingly poor at detecting lies based solely on behavioral cues. Accuracy rates are often only slightly better than chance.
Really? So it's not like on TV.
Not really, no. Many behaviors that are sometimes associated with deception, like fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, hesitations, can easily be caused by other factors entirely. Stress, anxiety, cultural norms, personality traits, even just thinking hard. There's a very high risk of misinterpretation and consequently making false accusations, which can badly damage relationships and trust.
Okay, so trying to be a human lie detector in everyday life is probably a bad idea. What's a better approach?
The ethical and practical approach is to shift your focus away from trying to definitively detect lies and towards promoting clarity, consistency, and verification. Don't try to be a lie detector, try to be a truth facilitator.
How do you do that?
Establish baselines, get to know people's normal communication style. Notice significant inconsistencies or deviations from that baseline, but view them as points needing clarification, not immediate proof of lying. If something seems inconsistent or unclear, seek clarification directly and respectfully without being accusatory. Where appropriate and feasible, try to verify important information through independent means or objective evidence. And always strive to maintain your own objectivity, recognizing the potential for misinterpretation. The goal should be improved understanding and communication accuracy, grounded firmly in ethical principles like fairness, respect for others, and avoiding harm. Making accusations based on misinterpreted behavioral cues violates those principles.
That makes a lot of sense. Focus on clarity and verification, not on trying to read minds or catch liars based on shaky cues. Okay, moving on from individual interactions, let's talk about leading teams, especially under pressure. Intelligence work seems like an environment where leadership is constantly tested.
Absolutely. Leadership and intelligence often involves guiding teams through intense ambiguity, high stakes, and significant stress. The principles tested in those environments offer valuable lessons for leaders in any field.
Are there core leadership principles we can glean from, say, unclassified CIA materials or writings by former leaders?
Yes, looking at publicly available documents about CIA values and expectations, and insights from former senior officers like Polymeropoulos, we can adapt several key themes that apply broadly to leadership anywhere.
Okay, what are some of those key themes?
First and foremost is integrity and ethics, maintaining the absolute highest standards, leading by example. Polymeropoulos talks about ensuring actions are righteous, meaning legal, ethical, and moral. Second is mission focus with a bias for action, having clear goals, being relentlessly focused on solving problems and achieving the mission, breaking down barriers. Polymeropoulos also strongly emphasizes being a people developer.
People development. Tell me more about that one.
This theme emphasizes that people are the most important resource. It involves treating everyone with respect, selecting the best people, and then actively working to make them better. Stimulating initiative, encouraging responsibility, fostering growth, promoting cooperation. It's about investing in your team. This ties into empowerment and appropriate risk-taking, giving people the freedom and authority to act, promoting calculated risk-taking, and accepting that honest failures will happen as part of learning, and delegating effectively.
So trust and empowerment are key. What else?
Humility and continuous improvement. Striving constantly to be better, welcoming constructive self-criticism within the team and organization, and implementing remedies when things go wrong. Polymeropoulos specifically mentions the need for humility to accept critique. Then there's courage and resilience. Seeking out and cultivating people who are courageous, creative, and willing to think independently, especially under pressure. Having the wisdom and courage to address the bigger, systemic issues. And finally, building trust and loyalty. Valuing mutual trust and confidence between leaders and team members, and demanding loyalty not just upwards, but loyalty to each other and to shared principles and the mission.
That's a powerful set of principles. How can we translate those into practical actions in our everyday leadership roles, whether formal or informal?
Well, it means consistently upholding high ethical standards yourself. Setting clear goals, but empowering your team to figure out how to achieve them. Creating an environment of psychological safety where people feel comfortable taking reasonable risks, asking questions, and admitting mistakes without fear of blame. Actively investing in your team members' growth and well-being. Building trust through transparency and reliability, and demonstrating humility by being open to feedback and acknowledging when you don't have all the answers.
It sounds like very human-centered leadership, even in a high-stakes environment. Now, a core challenge for any leader, especially in intelligence, must be making good decisions when you don't have all the facts, often under intense pressure.
That's a central challenge, yes. Making sound judgments with incomplete, ambiguous, and sometimes deliberately deceptive information is core to the job, especially for roles like specialized skills officers operating in the field. It relies heavily on those strong, critical thinking skills we discussed.
Right, the analysis and objectivity.
And also on high-level situational awareness, particularly Ensley's level 3, projection anticipating outcomes. Polymeropoulos talks about the importance of being comfortable in the gray, accepting ambiguity, and striving for clarity in crisis. Bustamante emphasizes the need for action over analysis paralysis when time is critical.
So how do they do it? Are there specific strategies for deciding under pressure and uncertainty?
They use a combination of approaches, gathering sufficient relevant information, but recognizing you'll rarely have all of it. Using simple frameworks or models to structure the problem, identifying the key variables and uncertainties, maintaining a clear focus on the ultimate goals or objectives, leveraging intuition and experience wisely, but always checking gut feelings against available evidence. Explicitly acknowledging and accepting uncertainty rather than pretending it doesn't exist, being adaptable and ready to change course if new information emerges. And sometimes, especially in time-critical situations, employing the concept of satisficing, choosing the first option that meets the minimum requirements, rather than searching indefinitely for the absolute perfect solution that might not exist or might come too late.
Satisficing. Choosing good enough when perfect isn't feasible. That makes sense under pressure. Now, high-stakes situations inevitably evoke fear and anxiety, both for leaders and their teams. How do leaders manage that?
That's a critical leadership function. Leaders need to manage their own fear response and also help their teams navigate theirs effectively. We mentioned stress inoculation training earlier. Bustamante talks about this helping to recalibrate the fear response over time. Polymeropoulos' win an Oscar principle, projecting calm and confidence even when you don't feel it, is partly about managing the team's anxiety by providing a stable reference point. Michel Ribi-Assad talks about consciously pushing through fear to get off the X.
Are there cognitive techniques mentioned?
Bustamante describes one technique, creating a stark, perhaps even overly simplistic false dichotomy in your mind, e.g., I either do this or everything fails, as a way to sometimes shut down overwhelming anxieties and focus the mind on the necessary action in a critical moment. It's a mental trick to bypass paralysis.
Interesting. So what are some practical approaches leaders can use?
Cognitive reframing, helping the team see the challenge differently. Maintaining leader composure is huge. Communicating clearly and frequently, especially about what is known and what the plan is. Focusing the team on controllable actions rather than uncontrollable worries, acknowledging the stress and validating people's feelings while simultaneously reinforcing confidence in their abilities and the plan.
Acknowledging the fear, but focusing on action.
Okay. And beyond managing crises, you mentioned earlier that a core principle was developing people and building team cohesion. That seems vital for long-term success. Absolutely essential. Leadership isn't just about achieving immediate tasks. It's about the ongoing development of individuals and fostering strong bonds within the team. This came through strongly in the CIA principles. Polymeropoulos is particularly passionate about this, constantly emphasizing, be a people developer. He advocates giving people opportunities, stretching them, and accepting that they'll make mistakes as part of learning. He also talks about fostering family values within the team, recognizing everyone's contributions, building camaraderie, supporting each other personally and professionally.
That family values idea sounds powerful for building loyalty.
It is. And the sources also mention valuing diversity within teams, recognizing that different perspectives and skills lead to stronger outcomes. And again, that emphasis on building mutual trust and loyalty is woven throughout.
So what are some practical actions leaders can take to actively develop their people and build that cohesion?
Things like strategic delegation, giving people challenging assignments that allow them to grow, providing regular mentorship and constructive feedback, recognizing contributions both publicly and privately. Polymeropoulos mentions the impact of simple, timely recognition, like awarding a symbolic dagger for outstanding work. creating an inclusive environment where everyone feels valued and heard, keeping the team focused on shared goals, and taking the time to build personal relationships and show genuine care for team members as individuals.
It sounds like investing in the team is investing in the mission. Okay, let's shift to another area where intelligence thinking seems highly relevant. Managing risk. We all face risks, big and small.
We do. Risk is inherent in life and work. The value we can take from intelligence practices is adopting a more proactive and structured approach to identifying, assessing, and mitigating potential risks.
So moving beyond just worrying about things.
Exactly. It starts with adopting a risk management mindset, shifting your perspective to view the future with potential risks factored into your thinking. Intelligence agencies, by their nature, constantly navigate significant risks. Think counterintelligence threats, the dangers of clandestine operations, protecting sources and methods. Former officers often apply this mindset to personal safety, avoiding crime, scams, or in the business world, advising on security, conducting due diligence, crisis planning. Hansen and Carlson write about this. At its core, risk assessment is about proactively identifying vulnerabilities and potential threats. The objective is to protect yourself or your goals by identifying weaknesses before they're exploited or cause failure. It's not about being pessimistic, it's about being prepared. It's shifting from passive worry to active consideration of what could realistically go wrong and then planning accordingly.
Okay, I like that proactive preparedness, not pessimism. So once you have that mindset, how do you actually identify and assess specific risks? Are there frameworks we can adapt?
Yes. The next step is identification and assessment. There are many formal risk management methodologies used in business and government. Qualitative analysis, quantitative analysis, failure modes and effects analysis, FMEA, Bodhi analysis, threat risk assessments, TRAs, the list goes on.
That sounds complicated. Are they useful for personal life?
Well, complex quantitative analysis is probably overkill and impractical for most personal decisions. However, the underlying principles and some simpler, more conceptual frameworks are definitely adaptable and very useful. Common steps in most methodologies include identifying the potential risks, threats, or hazards, identifying the assets you want to protect or the vulnerabilities that could be exploited, assessing the likelihood or probability of the risk occurring, often qualitatively, like low, medium, high, assessing the potential impact or consequence if the risk does occur, again, often qualitatively, and then prioritizing the risks, usually focusing most attention on those with both high likelihood and high impact.
Okay, likelihood times impact gives you a priority. What are some simple frameworks you could actually use?
A very common and adaptable tool is the qualitative risk matrix. You basically create a simple grid with likelihood on one axis, e.g. low, medium, high, and impact on the other axis, e.g. low, medium, high. You plot each unidentified risk onto this grid. Risks landing in the high corner obviously require the most urgent attention and mitigation efforts. This is very flexible and useful for making subjective judgments about risks in personal decisions like career moves, travel plans, financial choices.
Simple grid, visual priority. I like it. What else?
You can adapt the thinking behind FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis, without getting bogged down in the formal process. Just ask 3 simple questions about a plan, process, or system. What could possibly fail or go wrong? The failure mode. If it does fail, how bad would the consequences be? The effect severity, and how likely is this failure to happen? The occurrence. Then focus your preventative efforts on the potential failures with the highest severity and to the highest likelihood. This is great for improving personal routines, travel plans, or project execution.
What could fail? How bad? How likely? Simple and effective. Any others?
One more useful conceptual tool is simple Bodhi thinking. Imagine the risk event you're concerned about in the center, like the knot of a bow tie. On the left side, you list the potential causes or threats that could lead to that event. Below each cause, you list the preventive controls you have, or could put in place, to stop that cause from leading to the event. On the right side of the knot, you list the potential consequences if the event does happen. Below each consequence, you list the mitigative or recovery controls you have, or could implement, to reduce the impact of those consequences. It helps you visualize the whole risk scenario, causes, event, consequences, and identify gaps in your controls on both sides. Very useful for thinking about personal safety, household risks, or potential operational issues.
The bow tie, causes on the left, consequences on the right, controls underneath. That's a great visual.
The real value in using these simplified frameworks isn't necessarily the precise score or placement on the matrix, but the structured thinking process itself. It forces you to move beyond just intuition or vague worries and systematically examine potential problems and what you can do about them.
Right. The process matters more than the exact output. Now, assessing risks is one thing, but it's only useful if it leads to action, right? What about developing mitigation and contingency plans?
Absolutely. Assessment without action is pointless. The next step is risk treatment or developing mitigation strategies. The goal is always to reduce either the likelihood of the risk occurring or the potential impact if it does occur, or both.
How do you do that? What are the options?
There are generally four main risk treatment strategies. Avoidance. If a risk is too high, you might decide to simply avoid the activity altogether. For example, deciding not to invest in a very speculative venture. Reduction or mitigation. This is the most common, taking active steps to reduce the likelihood or impact. Example, installing security software, getting vaccinations before travel, diversifying investments. Transfer. Shifting the risk to another party, usually through insurance or contracts. And acceptance. For some risks, especially low likelihood, low impact ones, or where mitigation is too costly, you might consciously decide to accept the risk.
Okay, avoid, reduce, transfer, or accept. But if you accept a risk, shouldn't you still plan for it?
Yes, absolutely. Acceptance should ideally be paired with contingency planning. For risks you accept, or even for the residual risk that remains after mitigation, it's crucial to develop if-then contingency plans. What will you do if this risk actually materializes? Having a pre-thought-out plan enables a much faster, calmer, and more effective response when things do go wrong, rather than trying to figure it out in the middle of a crisis.
So plan A, but also have a plan B ready for the risks you know exist. Makes sense. Is risk management a one-time thing, or does it need updating?
Definitely not a one-time thing. Risk management has to be dynamic and ongoing. Environments change, new threats emerge, vulnerabilities shift, the effectiveness of your controls can degrade over time. All formal methodologies emphasize the need for iteration, updates, reviews, and maintenance. They often specify a review frequency.
So how does that translate practically for us?
In practical terms, it means periodically revisiting your risk assessments and mitigation plans, maybe annually, semi-annually, or whenever there's a significant change in your circumstances, like a new job, a move, a change in health. Stay informed about external factors that might create new risks relevant to you. It's a continuous loop. Assess, Jane, treat, monitor, mitigate, and reassess. This ongoing cycle is key to building and maintaining resilience over time.
Okay, continuous loop. Got it. Now, let's shift to a foundational skill that underpins almost everything else we've talked about. Memory. How important is memory in intelligence work, and how can we enhance ours?
Memory is absolutely a cornerstone of cognitive performance, both in intelligence and in everyday life. It's fundamental to learning, understanding complex information, making connections, and building expertise.
So in intelligence specifically?
Well, think about intelligence analysis. Analysts need to recall vast amounts of information, evaluate data, integrate new facts with existing knowledge, brief decision makers accurately, and answer questions quickly under pressure. Research actually links better analytical performance to how effectively analysts can organize and access information stored in their long-term memory.
So a good memory helps you think better.
Essentially, yes. Interestingly, some sources note that despite its importance, systematic memory training often receives less emphasis in intelligence training compared to, say, critical thinking or technical skills, which might be a missed opportunity. Improving your memory helps you manage information overload more effectively, freeing up your cognitive resources, your mental bandwidth for higher-level thinking, like analysis and problem solving. There's even a concept called intelligence memory, referring to the specific memory skills needed for the job. So enhancing your personal memory capacity benefits learning, communication, decision-making, pretty much everything.
Okay, so improving memory is definitely worthwhile. What are some simple, practical techniques we can use to improve our recall? And let's be clear, we're talking about ethical, science-based methods, right?
Absolutely. It's crucial to state explicitly that we are focusing only on ethical self-improvement techniques grounded in cognitive science. This is completely separate from and condemns the unethical historical experiments like MKUltra or Artichoke that unfortunately sometimes get associated with intelligence history. We're talking about proven learning strategies.
Good. So what are some of those evidence-based techniques?
Okay, first, recognize the limits of short-term memory. Information only stays there fleetingly. Bustamante mentions maybe 7 to 15 seconds unless you make a conscious effort to move it into long-term storage.
So pay attention and engage actively.
Exactly. Second, repetition, but use it strategically. Simple repetition helps strengthen memory traces. Bustamante gives the example of repeating someone's name immediately after being introduced. But spaced repetition, reviewing information at increasing intervals over time, is much more effective for long-term retention than just cramming.
Spaced repetition. Okay. What else?
Active recall. This is really powerful. Instead of just passively rereading material, actively test yourself. Try to recall the information from memory without looking at your notes. This effortful retrieval significantly strengthens memory consolidation.
Test yourself. Don't just reread. Got it.
Fourth, elaborative encoding. This means connecting new information to knowledge you already possess, making it more meaningful. There are several ways to do this. Create vivid mental imagery associated with the information. Make it unusual or striking. Relate the information to yourself. How does it connect to your own experiences or goals? Personal relevance boosts memory. Try explaining the information to someone else, even hypothetically. Having to structure and articulate it forces deeper processing. Research actually showed analysts improved recall using mnemonic techniques based on imagery and spatial context, like the memory palace.
Explain it to teach it. Okay, and you mentioned mnemonics.
Yes, mnemonics are memory aids or tricks. Things like acronyms, like IE we discussed earlier, simple rhymes, or more complex techniques like the method of loci, also known as the memory palace, where you associate items you want to remember with specific locations along a familiar mental journey. These techniques leverage visualization and association to make information more memorable.
So things like acronyms, rhymes, imagery, self-testing, spacing out reviews. It sounds like making a conscious effort really can improve memory.
It absolutely can. By consciously applying these techniques, you can see noticeable improvements in recalling names, facts, concepts, details from meetings or readings, which in turn enhances your learning, communication effectiveness, and ultimately your decision-making ability.
That's really encouraging. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground mindset, critical thinking, situational awareness, human dynamics, leadership, risk management, memory. How do we bring all these skills together? Is there a synergy?
There's absolutely a synergy. These aren't isolated skills. They're interconnected components of a more holistic approach to navigating life effectively.
Can you give an example of how they might work together?
Sure. Imagine you're facing a challenging, ambiguous project at work. Your enhanced situational awareness helps you perceive the complexities and potential roadblocks early, left of bang. Your critical thinking skills, maybe using a key assumptions check, help you analyze the situation objectively and evaluate potential strategies. This informs your decision-making about the best path forward. You use effective communication, maybe BLUF, to align your team and stakeholders. Understanding human dynamics, like Rice or Cialdini's principles, used ethically, helps you motivate your team and navigate disagreements constructively. Your adaptability allows you to adjust the plan as unexpected issues arise. Your resilience helps you manage the pressure and bounce back from setbacks, perhaps informed by proactive risk management and contingency planning. And throughout the process, your enhanced memory helps you retain key details, track progress, and learn from the experience. See how they all weave together.
Yeah, that paints a clear picture. They really do reinforce each other. Now, throughout this discussion, we've touched on ethics several times. How central is ethical application when integrating these skills?
It is absolutely central, and we can't emphasize this enough. Many of these skills, particularly those related to influence, understanding motivation, or even deception detection, which we advise caution on, carry a significant risk of misuse if not guided by strong ethical principles.
So how do we define ethical application in this context?
Think of it as applying these skills with empathy, fairness, and a fundamental respect for the autonomy and dignity of other people, using influence techniques for mutual benefit and collaboration, not manipulation. Using insights into motivation, like ICE, to understand and connect with people, not to exploit their needs. Using enhanced awareness for safety and understanding, not for paranoia or judgment. It requires continuous self-reflection on the potential impact of your actions on others. Some sources even talk about ethical intelligence, the ability to understand and apply moral principles through critical thinking, integrity, and considering consequences. This is crucial in intelligence work itself, and just as crucial when adapting these skills for everyday life. We have to consciously choose to use these powerful tools constructively and responsibly.
That's a really important reminder. Use the skills for good, essentially. Finally, mastering all of this sounds like a journey, not a destination. What about continuous practice?
You're absolutely right. Mastering these skills is a lifelong endeavor. Critical thinking requires ongoing practice. Situational awareness needs constant honing. Ethical intelligence evolves with experience and reflection. Risk management plans need periodic updates. Intelligence agencies themselves emphasize career-long training and development for a reason.
So how can listeners realistically practice and develop these skills over time?
The key is conscious application in small, everyday situations. Start small. Try actively listening in your next conversation. Practice using the Cooper color codes next time you're in a crowded public space. Mentally run a quick key assumptions check before making a non-critical decision. Make a specific effort to use a memory technique to recall names at the next meeting or social event. The crucial step is then to briefly reflect on these small applications. What worked? What didn't? What did I notice? This regular conscious practice and reflection helps build competence and allows these skills to become more integrated and natural over time.
Start small, practice consciously, reflect, and build from there. That sounds manageable. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful.
It really covers a lot of useful ground, doesn't it?
It really does. So, just to quickly recap, we've explored cultivating an intelligence mindset adaptability, resilience, proactivity, objectivity, curiosity, getting off the X. We dove into critical thinking techniques like Fasciona skills and SATs, plus clear communication with BLUF. We covered enhancing situational awareness using Ensley's model, observation skills, Cooper codes, and proactive awareness. We looked at mastering human dynamics through rapport, communication strategies, understanding motivation with Rice, ethical influence via Cialdini, and cross-cultural intelligence. We touched on leadership under pressure, proactive risk management, and foundational memory enhancement techniques.
And the key takeaway, again, isn't about trying to become a spy. It's about leveraging these principles honed in high-stakes environments to become a more aware, prepared, thoughtful, resilient, and ultimately more effective individual in your own life.
Exactly. And always, always with that crucial emphasis on ethical application, using these skills constructively with respect for others. So, as a final thought for everyone listening, consider just one area we discussed today. Where could you consciously apply a new principle or technique this week just to observe the impact? What personal X might you need to recognize and start moving off of? What underlying assumption in a current plan really needs checking? How could maintaining a little more condition yellow benefit you in your daily routine? We encourage you to explore further and really consider how these powerful spy skills, adapted ethically, can empower you in navigating your own world.